Welcome to Washington Times Higher Ground. You have a new book, and I want to start with this book coming out, and it's called The Magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln. I have a lot of questions about this, and a lot of questions about Tad Lincoln because I don't know a lot about him. But what was it that led you to this particular historical subject?
Well, it's exactly what you mentioned a second ago. I knew nothing about Tad Lincoln, and I stumbled on him. Like you, every year I had either covered or seen presidents go out and pardon a turkey on in the Rose Garden. But I didn't know the origins of this story. And it turns out Tad Lincoln, and I won't, spoiler alert, I'm not going to give away everything, but Tad Lincoln and his father Abraham Lincoln are intimately tied not only to Thanksgiving, but to an annual national tradition that we continue to this day. And when I started digging into this story, I realized, my last book was a picture book for families about Edison and how his mother saved Edison. This book is really about how a young boy, Tad Lincoln, saves his father in many ways. And when I got into the complexity of this relationship, he was at Lincoln's side at all of these major events. They went everywhere together to review troops, to major addresses. When he traveled to see the Civil War front, Tad Lincoln was always at his side. And I started asking myself why. And as I dug into that, it helped me not only understand this bond between father and son that I think we all can profit from, but the importance of a child, not only in the life of a family, but in the life of a nation. And I thought that was an important story to tell that had been neglected for too long.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of these people who have incredible stories and who were so influential, right behind the scenes, or working with the leaders we know, and we never hear
Yeah,
about them. So the fact that you're
yeah.
tackling this is incredibly intriguing. As you were going through this, because again, it's so easy to research Abraham Lincoln, to go and look up his
Yeah.
life, but as you were looking at Tad, his son, and sort of going through his life and his influence, what did it teach you actually about Abraham Lincoln through the eyes of his child?
It taught me so much about Lincoln because growing up as a child of the South, you are taught a certain mind cast, or you have a certain cast of mind of what Lincoln was, is, and should be. All of those were blown to bits when I started digging into the story through Tad. Now, there's not a lot written about Tad Lincoln. There's only one out of print book out about him that I tracked down. But you have little bits and pieces here and there. So I used those historical tidbits to, craft this narrative and to make it look, it is harder to write this type of book, I found, Billy, than to write a little chapter book, which was originally my intention. I started writing a chapter book on this and I stopped because you only have 19 flips in a picture book. That's all you got, 19 flips, and that's not a lot of time to tell a full story. Um, so I decided to target and focus on Lincoln's view of mercy, forgiveness, which was a major theme through the end of his presidency and in his personal life. And in this year that I sort of tackled, 1863 and just before it, Abraham Lincoln loses his son. The war is going badly. Things are really going south for him, no pun intended. And he really is in an emotional spiral. And it helped me, I guess, focus on Lincoln the man rather than the political figure. And what I learned was he hoped to unite the nation. And Thanksgiving was meant as a season of forgiveness and unity, something we've forgotten. And the family story, the backstory of that, I thought was as interesting as I didn't even realize Lincoln was the one who proclaimed and made Thanksgiving a national holiday, but he did. And I think that was driven in part by what was happening in his personal life and his professional life. And that's the story we really tell here through the eyes of this young boy who was instrumental in all of it and certainly present for so much of it.
Yeah, when it comes to mercy and forgiveness, you hit on this there a second ago, but this book obviously comes as the holiday season is going to be heating up. We're going to be inching towards Thanksgiving, but it
Yeah.
really comes in the backdrop of a nation that is deeply divided. And we say this every election cycle, we're more divided than ever, but we really are, at least in my lifetime, right? More divided than I can remember us being on almost every front. there's gracelessness, there's cancel culture, there's, and you know this better than anybody, you're a
Yeah,
cultural commentator as well.
yeah.
Looking at where we are right now, what can people take away from this book, right? From the lessons in this book and exploring the Lincoln family that can maybe help us navigate some of where we are right now?
Well, one of the things that struck me, and I can't remember which book I saw it in, but it describes Lincoln playing with his boys, and we never have this picture of Abraham Lincoln in our head. We always have that very sour kind of dour, depressed, a man carrying the weight of the world in a broken country on his back. This story of Lincoln, and the Lincoln I try to tell, I mean, even in the illustration, I said, I want to see Lincoln having a good time here, because this image was actually driven by a couple of lines I found in multiple accounts. And they said when he would play with his boys, Lincoln would be reduced to neighing laughter. He'd double over and be reduced to neighing laughter. And it made me realize, when Tad would barge into the cabinet meetings, and and by the way, his secretaries and the cabinet did not like these boys. They thought they were out of control, and Tad Lincoln was a hellion. However, Lincoln not only tolerated it, he endorsed it and encouraged it, because I think in the midst of the chaos, and you're talking about division and disunity, here's the central point of this book, and I think maybe the reason I wrote it, that I discovered after I wrote it. Lincoln needed this boy in his life as we need our children in our lives, because they are reminders that God has not abandoned us, and they're reminders of joy and light in the midst of darkness and chaos. They're a reminder of what can be and what should be. And I think that's why Lincoln, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes. That's why he encouraged that child to run the halls and do what he wanted, knock over vases and cause chaos everywhere, because it was a spark and moment of normalcy and happiness in the midst of a political collapse and a country literally coming apart. And Thanksgiving and that tradition that Abraham Lincoln and Tad Lincoln created together, I think, are the living monuments of that love they shared as father and son, and a reminder of the unity that's still possible despite the political differences, even the cultural differences that divide us today. And that's part of why I wanted to tell this story.
Yeah, no, and it's an incredible story to tell, and it's very timely, obviously. And one thing that I've really admired about watching, your journey and the work that you do a lot of different things. You're a cultural commentator. People see you on Fox and other places, and yet, in the last year, you've been out with these books, these family books, these kids books. And that's a different trajectory in a lot of ways. It's another layer. What has sort of led you to say, what, I want to tackle these historical figures, I want to tackle these topics, and reach an audience that might be a little different than some of the audiences you're reaching on your other platforms?
Yeah, well, look, we're only here for a little time. I mean, Abraham Lincoln. When I read this story, when you look at the trajectory of this story, it's not always a happy, joyous story. I mean, this is a family contending with loss, and when I look around, I see friends who have lost children. I see people who have endured terrible tragedies. The country is certainly at a tension point, a breaking point, if you will. So, a part of what I think my calling is not only to reach families with something uplifting, but real, and in this case, historical. I mean, this Turnabout Tales series is all about facing a challenge, making a decision, and watching history turn in that decision. And every one of these figures, that's what happens, because that's what happens in all of our lives. And it's important to let kids know the obstacles you face, the opposition, that's not the end of the story. That's the portal and the beginning of your story. And so I felt called to tell these. No one was telling them in this way. This is a fun story. There's a lot of slapstick. Tad Lincoln gets into all kinds of mischief and mayhem. But the backstory of here is really the origins of a national holiday and why it should still matter. And why am I doing this? Because I think families are important. I think being together is important, um, family unity and bonds. So all of this really is to bring people together, mothers and fathers and their kids and aunts and uncles and grandparents, and even mentors and friends. Mentors are so important, and teachers with kids. And I'm doing a Christmas album this year, Christmas Merry and Bright. And the whole point is again to excite people about another great holiday, Christmas, its meaning, and to bring them together around a moment of joy, an explosion of joy in the case of that album. So, yeah, things come to you at different moments, and you have a chance and a choice to say, do you want to curse the darkness or do you want to build something up? Do you want to do something positive and bring some light? I've decided to take that path. You can only throw rocks for so long. The quarry's empty here, so we don't. That I've run out of rocks. That's really not helpful. It's fun. It feels good, but it's not. It doesn't really build anything up or change any life. This stuff does, I think.
Yeah, pointing out the issues is good. We have to do it, but giving the
You
solutions,
bet.
right? A generation that is lost, confused, losing history because of how people are teaching history or leaving history out, being able to be a solution and create something like this. It's a really powerful thing, and I admire you for doing it. The book is The Magnificent Mischief of Tad Lincoln. Appreciate your time today.
Billy, always a joy. Thank you for your time and your great work.